Oh, North Korea at it again, warning America of a, quote, merciless strike just one day before we in South Korea are set to begin our annual military exercises there. Pyongyang calling the drills, quote, reckless behavior, driving the situation into the uncontrollable phase of a nuclear war, they claim. Well, will the exercises further heighten and inflame the tensions, or bluntly remind Kim Jong-un of what his military forces could face? John Bolton is a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Fox's contributor, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and chairman of the Gatestone Institute here in New York. So, Ambassador, is this more North Korea bluster? You know, reduce the U.S. to ashes, fire missiles near Guam, or could these joint drills, which have been held for decades, could they actually provoke a military response, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I think this is part of the North Korean propaganda strategy. But it's a vital element for them to achieve their long-term goal of getting U.S. forces off the Korean peninsula and their really long-term goal of taking control of the entire peninsula. You know, people ask, why does North Korea want nuclear weapons? And one frequent answer is to defend themselves against the threat of the United States. The real reason is this would give them an enormous tool for leverage and pressure against South Korea. And so this exercise, it is defensive, as Secretary Mattis was quoted as saying a few minutes ago. But from the North's perspective, it demonstrates U.S. forces are still very much committed to the defense of South Korea, and that's what they object to.
And in a way, as you just point out, does that in a sense bolster Kim Jong-un's regime? Because now, he's got the boogeyman to point to us, as a rationale to continue his nuclear program.
Right. Well, that's propaganda that many people in the United States believe, that he wouldn't have developed the nuclear weapon or ballistic missile capability he has, but for the fact he feels that we have a hostile intent toward him. Instead, causality flows the other way. Who would care about North Korea if they didn't threaten South Korea and ultimately the United States and others around the world?
So when you talk about the freeze for freeze, and Steve Bannon talked about that, I'll ask you in a second. I mean, any possibility of this? This is exactly what Russia and China want, for us to freeze these military exercises and not conduct them, while they allegedly would freeze their nuclear program. You know how good their promises have been in the past.
Yeah, I mean, Freddie Clay, the great scholar and arms control negotiator, once described North Korea as being possessed of boundless mendacity, and he was being kind. The fact is that now we have the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense both saying our aim is to negotiate with North Korea, as if we haven't been doing that for the past 25 years. I think the end result will be the same. North Korea has repeatedly promised to give up its nuclear weapons program. They just never seem to get around to doing it. And this, I think, is what President Trump needs to focus on. Let's be clear, his three predecessors made a lot of mistakes. But it's very likely, if we continue these policies, that North Korea and Iran, I might add, will become full-fledged nuclear weapon states on his administration's watch. And while there's plenty of blame to spread around, history will record that it happened during the Trump administration if these policies continue.
So what do you suggest?
Well, I think there are very few good diplomatic options left. My view for quite some time has been you need to try and persuade China. It's in their interest to accept reunification of the peninsula, essentially under the South Korean model. Others have proposed a coup against Kim Jong-un's regime. That might work if reunification fails. But otherwise, I think the question for the American people is, will you be content to allow North Korea to continue to have any kind of nuclear weapons capability? A capability they could sell to others like Iran or terrorist groups, and a capability they can use for nuclear blackmail to remove American forces from the peninsula, to remove them from Japan. That's just getting started. Well,
you just mentioned blackmail, finally. I mean, Steve Bannon addressed that in his American Prospect interview. Let me quote you some of that. Quote, Bannon said he might consider a deal in which China got North Korea to freeze its nuclear buildup with verifiable inspections, and the United States removed its troops from the peninsula. But such a deal seemed remote. Quote, there's no military solution to North Korea's nuclear threats. Forget it, said Bannon, until somebody solves the part of the equation that shows me that 10 million people in Seoul don't die in the first 30 minutes from conventional weapons. I don't know what you're talking about. There's no military solution here. They got us. So what are the chances of that withdrawal? About zero. And indeed, is there no military solution?
Well, I think under this administration, the chances of withdrawal are zero. But if you don't like North Korea's behavior today, imagine what it would be like when it has 60 or 100 ICBMs, each of which has a nuclear warhead at the tip of it, which it could deliver against the United States. I understand the concern about South Koreans being put in jeopardy if there's a military option that we take. I tell you what concerns me, it's millions of dead Americans. This regime is not rational in our terms. It may be rational in its own terms, but it's a different universe that they're living in. And the circumstances that we face there with Iran, potentially with other rogue states or terrorist groups getting nuclear weapons, this is an inflection point. If we can't stop North Korea and Iran from getting nuclear weapons, I think there's no limit to it worldwide.
And Kim Jong-un has promised and threatened just what you said. Ambassador John Bolton, as always, good to see you on our Sundays.
Thank you, Eric.
Of course.